Hello, everyone. This is Harold Cruz, and this is Southern Nationalist Radio. This is episode 60, and this evening we're with Brad Griffin. Evening, Brad.
Good evening, Harold.
I hope you had a great Thanksgiving.
I sure did.
Good.
Had a great time with family, and have just been taking the last few days off, relaxing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd hoped to get a podcast earlier in this week, as far as the week of Thanksgiving, but Dr. Hill was tied up. I probably should have reached out to you to see if you were available anytime during the week, but I didn't until today. So, oh well.
Okay, it's no big deal.
All right. So, what do you want to talk about this evening?
Well, there's not really much in the news right now, and it seems everyone, I've seen is really been focused on the year that's passed. It's been a year since Trump won the 2016 election. It's been a year since, for the alt-right, it's been a year since Hillgate. And, everybody seems to be, focused on, the year that's passed and reflecting on, how things went.
Yep.
So let's talk about that.
Sounds good.
I think we would obviously we'd have to start off with Trump's win. Was it November 8th? I want to say 2016.
That sounds right.
It sounds about right. It was early November, but I remember just being thrilled and on top of the world, and I didn't. Of course, Trump wasn't a Southern nationalist, but I had got heavily involved in the campaign and was on Twitter every day. I remember analyzing polls, just got all into it.
Oh yeah, I remember. And he's not even he's not white nationalist or an ethnic nationalist. So
yeah, not white. He was a
nationalist.
Steve Bannon sort of. I thought I kind of agree with Richard Spencer on this, that maybe he was this was a kind of a Vidaire style civic nationalist. Okay, it's not it's not my ideal, but it's not necessarily bad, and it's a huge improvement over what had come before. That was from the preceding from mid 2015 when he announced until he won. That's the impression everyone had got from following Trump. This was going to be great. We're taking down the establishment. He's going to do all these things. Personally, I went out to Arkansas and I wrote a speech for that, and I gave my thoughts on. I'm glad I did that because I collected my thoughts at the time. This was last September, and I thought about, this will be about where we will be if Trump wins. This will be where we will be if Hillary wins. I look back on that as a touchstone of, my mindset and what I was thinking about Trump last year. And, I thought it was going to be, I thought for sure, that Congress would try to, I said this at the time, that Congress would try to block and fight him on everything, which seems to have been the case. But, the president, by himself has, wide authority to do all kinds of things on his own authority, right?
Well, you think so, but the courts seem to have a different opinion about that.
Yeah. So, the courts have a different opinion. And so I thought, he'd be able to do a lot of things as president. Just the president pretty much controls our foreign policy. Mm-hmm. The president has, wide latitude to enforce immigration laws, just things like that, especially law and order. The backdrop of Trump winning was all these riots in all these cities with Black Lives Matter. And so, when it comes to our foreign policy, when it comes to restoring law and order, when it comes to vetoing bad legislation, I expected a lot more because, just with his powers alone, I figured he should be able to do a lot more. So I was on top of the world. I was just overjoyed, even though, even then I was kind of skeptical because, we Southern nationalists, we don't believe the system can be reformed, but I had laid out a whole list of reasons of the way, Trump would be good for us. And the main thing is that, this was a big blow against conservatism. It would fatally weaken conservatism.
Yeah. Well, it has.
It has, yeah. But, and there's a lot of stuff that, actually came true. I thought, no matter who won, the winner would be perceived as illegitimate, that also that, it would be an extremely polarizing election. So we would, have a much more polarized political environment, and that came true.
Uh-huh.
So I think we'll start off, with Hellgate, because that happened about a week and a half after the election.
Okay. And then we'll
that was the first turning point, I think. That was the first moment in a series of moments that have led to this. And, after that, they put all this in front of Trump, and they're like, do you disavow? Do you disavow? And he was, it was a grudging, yes, I disavow, I condemn, I disavow, I condemn. And, he kind of brushed it to the side, right?
Yeah.
He didn't want to deal with it. It was uncomfortable for him. But, he had been doing this all throughout the campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first, kind of blackpilling moment where our enthusiasm kind of tapered down a little. But we didn't really attach much significance to that.
Yeah.
I think, we were kind of used to the disavows, and we're like, okay, this is just a wink, wink. I thought it was a bit more than that at the time. I think my reaction was more negative than other people. Because this was the first time, previously it had been like white nationalists like William Johnson, white nationalists like Jared Taylor or David Duke. This time he was actually, he was asked specifically, do you condemn and disavow the alt-right? And he said, I condemn, I disavow, right? So
now,
that was...
For those who don't remember, Hellgate was the 2016 MPI conference in D.C.
Yeah.
Held a little bit after the election. And at the, I guess, the final speech or the keynote speech by Richard Spencer, he held up his glass of his beverage and said, "Hail victory, hail Trump," or was it "Hail Trump" or "Hail victory," one or the other. And 6 or 7 or maybe 8 people in the audience of about 300 or so returned Roman salutes to Richard's held up glass. And so the media was there, and they got some people on video doing that. And they, like they usually do, they misled it by showing different angles of some of the same people to make it look like it was more people doing it than it actually was. And so this turned into a little bit of a fervor there for about a week and a half or so. So yeah, just a little background there.
Yeah, it was a news cycle, and it set off the big divide with the alt-right, between the rift between the alt-right and the alt-right. Really got started with the Hellgate news cycle. That's when the lines were drawn.
Yeah, we scraped all.
Now, personally, and a lot of people, blame Spencer for that, and I wasn't one of those people. I thought it was kind of exaggerated.
Yep.
I thought like 2 things had changed since the election. First of all, Trump had won, right?
Yep.
So like he didn't need us to win the election anymore. That had changed. And what had also changed is that a lot of these alt-right people probably didn't think Trump was going to win, but now that he had won, they were all looking forward to the administration and what kind of role they would play in it as like, the Trump cheerleaders.
Yeah. Well, that or maybe step into the media some way. Like Cernovich appears occasionally in some of the larger media outlets.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Well, anyway, that was I think around November 19th, Hellgate, I want to say, around that time.
Yeah.
And what happened was, and this was very significant, from like the end of November until the beginning of January, really from the beginning of November to the inauguration was the transition period. And I remember how unusual it was, because at the time, football season was going on here in the South, and I was just glued to politics. And I was completely ignoring sports. I don't really follow it that, as closely as a lot of people do around here, but I still kind of pay attention. I know what's going on. And I was just glued to every move that Trump was making during that transition period.
Mm-hmm.
And I was following it really closely. I was looking at who he picked for his, the cabinet picks, who was showing up at the transition period. And I was the first, I want to say, undoubtedly, all these other people were saying, we're the mainstream now and we should be Republicans. And there was an article about this today that kind of, Richard was saying hail Trump and all this, and everyone else was just more over the moon. And I was looking at the transition period And I wrote, a series of articles about this. With each cabinet pick, the first few were good. There was like Michael Flynn for National Security Advisor. Then there was, of course, Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, Bannon as Senior Advisor, Stephen Miller as a Senior Advisor. And then after that, it seemed like everything else was just crap,
Yeah, a lot of the establishment people were tapped.
Yeah, I mean, it was Chief of Staff was going to be Reince Priebus. Then you had 2 or 3 generals. What was it? General Kelly.
Yeah, and
we were disappointed that Kelly got Homeland Security instead of Kobach.
Yep. And then you had
that was a disappointment.
You had Tillerson come in, who was a big.
Tillerson.
Who was the labor appointment?
Puzder, yeah, Puzder. He picked the CEO of Hardee's, who's known as this pro-amnesty, cheap labor, guy as the Secretary of Labor, and that was a huge warning sign.
Yeah.
That the campaign had been about, it was about the forgotten man and the white working class. It was getting screwed over by the globalists and the bankers, and he picked Puzder as his labor secretary. So that was like, that was one of the first moments you're like, okay, you had the campaign and then you had this, and this is completely different from what we heard in the campaign. And, of course, the biggest moment in the transition of all was when he announced that Gary Cohn, the president of Goldman Sachs, was going to be his chief economic advisor.
Yeah.
After, the whole campaign had been about, like, Hillary is a puppet of Goldman Sachs, Cruz is a puppet of Goldman Sachs, and I had, like, spread that myself. I had been, like, that was one of the main reasons, like that was a clear contrast that, Hillary was owned by Wall Street, that Cruz was owned by Wall Street.
Yeah.
And that was used significantly against both of them.
Yeah, which is true.
It hurt them tremendously.
They were, or still are, I suppose.
Yeah, and so that was a major red flag. The thing with Puzder was a major red flag, and he also started to tap a lot of the big Republican donors like Betsy DeVos,
yeah,
right?
Secretary of Education.
Yeah, Secretary of Education. That was a huge donor, and there was a couple others. I think the deputies, he chose someone to be, I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, as the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Ricketts.
Okay.
One of the Ricketts, one of the big donors from Nebraska.
And, of course, there was, is her name Chow, Mitch McConnell's wife for transportation?
Yeah, Mitch McConnell's wife. So it was, the cabinet ended up being Trump, Sessions, Bannon, Flynn, Miller, and then the rest it was these generals, these throwback conservatives like Rick Perry, big donors like Betsy DeVos,
and of course of those
huge corporate people like corporate Wall Street types like Cohn, and then you had Puzder being another one. So I mean, you just saw this, and you're like, this is not the kind of government you kind of expected him to assemble. And it was a huge. I thought it. I was looking at this, and I was like, this is going to be the government for the most of the term, right?
Yeah. Now, of course,
and
the people that you mentioned that were more favorable towards, really only Sessions was in the cabinet. The others were advisors.
Yeah.
So the other people,
that's right.
As far as Bannon and Miller and Gorka,
mm-hmm.
they didn't have a power to advise any federal agencies or to make recommendations as far as additional appointments for undersecretaries or deputy assistants or anything like this.
But I mean, he's trying to put Puzder in charge of the Labor Department. He's trying to put Scott Pruitt, who he did, I think, in charge of the EPA. Big conservative, pro-corporation guy. Betsy DeVos in charge of education, and then of course the Pentagon, Mattis, in charge of defense, and then of course Homeland Security. That was the other one we were hoping for, and it went to General Kelly.
Yeah.
So it was already a sense, already by Christmas, by New Year's, I was very, very skeptical of Trump. I wrote an article. It's called "The Trump Honeymoon is Over," and I listed all this stuff, and I was like, look, the people he's picking to run the government he's surrounding himself with is completely at odds with all the stuff he said in the campaign, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I got so much pushback on that. People were like, oh, you're blackpilling me. We got to give Trump a chance. It's too early to call. And I agreed with that. So I thought, and, you know, I had to make a big decision. I had to decide whether we were going to go to the inauguration. So by January, I was kind of, you know, bummed out on Trump. Mm-hmm. But, you know, my wife and her family, they were all still wanting to go. And my mother-in-law was going, and her family. So, you know, I kind of like, okay, well, I'll go to the inauguration, and what we'll do is we'll just see how it turns out. You know, keep an open mind. These cabinet picks are kind of, you know, alarming, especially Gary Cohn and Puzder. But we'll see how it plays out in the first 100 days, right?
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, you had all the fighting with the alt-right. And so by January, even before Trump was inaugurated, there was like three things that I knew was going to happen. First of all, the whole thing over Deplorable revealed that homosexuals were going to, you know, the Overton window had moved, and homosexuals were going to be, you know, mainstream now. Yeah. But the alt-right wasn't, okay? So that was clear before the inauguration. Two, it had been announced what the agenda was for the coming year. And I did a tweet storm about this on January 2nd. And the agenda was going to be health care, taxes, Dodd-Frank, repealing Dodd-Frank, and getting rid of regulation. So, I mean, it was clear even before weeks out before the inauguration, what the whole agenda was going to be for 2017 on Capitol Hill. And then, of course, you had the government coming in, and you had all these alarming, it just didn't look like the nationalists, the populists were well represented in the cabinet, right? So that's where we were at by January. And, you know, I was even by January, I was already a lot more negative on Trump than everyone else, because everyone else was still like over the world, you know, over the moon.
Oh, yeah.
All, you know, now a lot of people in the Southern Nationalist movement never even supported Trump.
No.
I was the biggest supporter, right?
Oh, yeah.
In Southern Nationalism. What do you think about this? About where we're at? We're about at January before the inauguration.
No, I think it's about right as far as aside from a few picks in his cabinet and his team, the rest of them were pretty disappointing. And also his agenda that he had set out, as you described, was pretty disappointing as well. I guess after the inauguration was somewhat encouraging, and that the Antifa, there was a pretty good crackdown on Antifa in D.C. at the inauguration. So that was good to see. I was glad to see that. You're
right. I went to the inauguration, and I thought the speech he gave, I remember standing on the National Mall when he was sworn in, and I thought the speech he gave was pretty good. It was something, you know, okay, this is going to be the guiding light of the administration moving forward. This is pretty good.
There's a little red meat in there,
and then
a little bit.
The Antifa had rioted in D.C., and then there was this, I remember on the way back, it was announced, I remember looking at my Twitter on the way back as my wife was driving, and it was announced that there was going to be a crackdown on Antifa. So I was like, okay, great. We're going to have law and order, okay? So around the inauguration, I was feeling, I know what it was. It changed my mind. Trump got into this big feud with John Lewis in January.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great. And that kind of, you know, made me think, okay, well, this is how it's going to be. President Trump, he's not going to change. He's not going to, you know, they kept saying he was going to pivot. He was going to pivot, you know. He was going to pivot to being this something different than he was during the campaign. But so the thing about John Lewis kind of encouraged me to think, okay, well, he's not going to pivot away from what he was in the campaign, right?
Yeah.
And so then, you know, you had the inauguration,
and then the next big.
And then you had like a month. I think he had a really strong.
Well, I think
first month.
The biggest event was the joint address to Congress. After the inauguration, other than his continuing appointments. And,
yeah. When was that? Was that in February or March?
No, that was January.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, I think so. Because
it's
usually done around the same day as the State of the Union, and that's during January, I believe.
Yeah, I think it might have been in February. I think it was a little space between the inauguration, which I believe was January 20th, and the State of the Union. It was called the Joint Address to Congress, because my opinion had been starting to change by then. But anyway, it seemed like from around January 20th till February, the end of February, he had like a strong. My overall impression was, okay, good. It was a strong month, and that was basically because of all these executive orders that were issued, right?
Yeah.
There was the so-called Muslim ban executive order. There was one, I believe, on sanctuary cities.
Mm-hmm.
What other executive orders did he issue that were encouraging?
Well, there
was like a crackdown on crime. It was supposed to be like a crackdown on crime executive order.
And there was the I don't know if it's in the same time frame you're talking about, the military tranny order saying, we're not doing that.
That was much later. That was over the summer.
Okay.
Yeah, but at the very beginning, it was like the executive orders he issued, like, okay, there's going to be this is the immigration crackdown that he had talked about. Especially on is what's become known as the Muslim ban and sanctuary cities. Well, both of those got held up in federal court, right?
Several times, yeah.
Several times. And my impression of that was, okay, well, that's kind of what I expected. I mean, it wasn't an unexpected thing, right?
No.
Of course that was going to be held up in the court, right?
Yeah.
It was something everyone who follows these issues, I mean, there's just no way the ACLU is going to let that stand without a legal battle over it, right?
No. Well, and also some of the far left states as well, like California.
Yeah, far left states too.
Hawaii and that sort of
So, of course, they were going to tie that up in court.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the big consequence of that, it seems, is that, Trump kind of blamed Bannon for that. That was used against Bannon. Okay, this is like used to promote. This is how the narrative that Bannon was failing started, right?
Yeah.
These people around Trump began to say, oh, well, look, these are supposed to be easy wins, and look, it got held up in court, and it's Bannon's fault. And that was the start. That was really the start of this move away from the campaign. I mean, it really escalated at that point. Like he had come in like with the election, the primaries, and the victory over Hillary, he came in really strong, and then he assembled that cabinet, and then he was inaugurated. And for about a month after he was inaugurated, it was the momentum of the campaign was still flowing into the agenda.
Yeah.
But those court orders got blocked. I mean, those executive orders got blocked in court. There was kind of like a move away from that. And I saw that in the media, like the people were saying, well, Trump needs to like move away from Bannon's agenda. He's sinking in the polls. He needs to be more establishment, was the argument at the time, right?
Yeah, and also at the same time, there was the Russia narrative that was trying to be pushed by the media and the Democrats as well.
Yeah, the Russian narrative was starting. Okay, so this brings us to around. I remember my whole attitude towards this, and it was really strong in November, kind of waned a bit through late November and December, picked up again in January and February, and then we get to March, which I think was this critical month, because by the end of March, I remember my impression was, this was. I really wasn't writing about it so much at the time. I was trying to, in fact, not think about politics by going back to writing about history. But that's when the whole healthcare thing started. The healthcare bill in Congress. And I thought that was just going to be a disaster. I even said it at the time. I said this healthcare bill is going to be a big quagmire. They're going to get in there. It's just going to soak up. It's going to be a tar baby, just like it was for Obama. It's going to suck up all Trump's political capital. Nothing will probably come of it. And that was my attitude towards it. And so when March happened, when Paul Ryan and them began to move on the health care bill, and Trump got involved in that, my interest in it started to, I really was starting to get more negative.
Yeah, the Ryan plan.
The Ryan, it was the beginning, it was really the beginning of the Ryan agenda, and it was all these things. It wasn't just health care. It was like they wanted to use Trump's victory, and he had listed a lot of them, saved them in Congress. Mm-hmm. And they interpreted his victory as like, okay, well, we need to get rid of Obamacare. We need to do tax cuts. We need to get rid of all these regulations. We need to pass this thing called the REINS Act, which is going to kill all these regulations. And, and also, they needed to do finance reform, which was to do all these favors for the big banks and Wall Street, right? Mm-hmm. The things they wanted. And so, like, they moved on the REINS Act, as it was called. They moved on the health care bill, I want to say. And that's what they were doing. That was dominating the agenda for the whole month of March. And in the whole month of March, it seemed like there was this effort to, like, say that Trump's administration was in disarray, and it was all Bannon's fault, right?
Yeah.
Because of the executive orders, which was the only good thing that we had seen so far. So, it was really around the end of March, I want to say, especially right at the beginning of April. That was the turning point. It was the last week of March, the first week of April, and that's when, like, it seemed like Jared Kushner and Ivanka became so powerful in the administration that, like, the Bannon nationalist populist wing that was all the reporting at the time, that Bannon and them were losing power to Gary Cohn and Jared Kushner, right?
Yeah, and of course
that was accurate. That was true.
Cohn is one of Jared Kushner's people.
Mm-hmm.
He brought into the administration.
Yeah,
and it was the first week of April that the biggest event of Trump's took place.
Oh, yeah.
Which really just killed any alt-right enthusiasm for Trump. That was the Syria bombing, the bombing of a Syrian airfield by U.S. Air Force. Or maybe.
Yeah, and that was, and Ivanka and Jared Kushner were right, with the biggest cheerleaders for that.
Yeah.
Now, backing up a little minute, during the transition, I said on my website that the first alarm bell that had gone off that made me think, okay, well, this is not what it was sold as, was when Anthony Scaramucci was put on the Trump transition team, right, to help select cabinet members and stuff, right?
And he's a Wall Street guy.
One of the top, known as the Mooch, one of the guy who just personifies
sleaze,
the hedge fund industry in Wall Street, right? Mm-hmm. And just like, the biggest well-known red flag out there, he was affiliated with Jeb Bush and Scott Walker during the campaign and really opposed everything Trump was trying to do in the primaries. But then he wound up on the transition team, right? And then that's how, you get to Gary Cohn. And then it was like, so later about March, we realized that the reason we have Cohn here is because of Jared Kushner, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole 2 years, no one even thought about Jared Kushner. He was just in the background of the campaign. The sons were out Don Jr. and Eric were the ones who were always out there on the campaign trail. And those two, like, after the election was over, remained behind in New York, whereas Kushner and Ivanka became powerful in the White House.
Yeah. And also during the transition team as well.
Yeah, so what happened is in March, within the Trump administration, the Kushner faction with Kushner and Gary Cohn and Ivanka and another one is Dina Powell and all these other people began to, like, muscle out the Bannon wing, right? And, the shift in power was evident by the time they struck Syria. And that was the big turning point. I mean, for the alt-right as a whole, like, a lot of people kind of jumped off Trump at that moment.
Yeah, there was a demonstration in D.C. at the White House against the bombing in Syria by Richard Spencer and Mike Enoch and some of the other alt-right guys.
Yeah, so Enoch and Spencer and them were, alarmed enough by it. There was all this talk that we were going to invade Syria.
Yeah.
We never did, and I think, a lot of that was because, a lot of that was because, the freak out that Syria caused.
Yeah, there just wasn't popular support for it. I mean, people don't want another Middle East war.
Yeah, so we were extremely alarmed about it. At the time, we thought we were about to plunge into a ground invasion of Syria. And, the Trump administration actually backed off that when they saw, how much opposition there was to it. But nothing was ever the same after April, because after April, people started to, but not just people like me, who was one of the critics early, but Spencer and Enoch and the alt-right as a whole began to kind of drift away from mainstream politics and started to get involved in the activism again, right? Because Auburn happened soon after that.
Yeah. Now, of course, it was that same event that while we were condemning the Syria attack, all the mainstream media and all the establishment politicians out there saying, this was the moment Trump became president. And
that was right.
How wonderful it is that he's being so presidential. And this
it was the only news cycle where they were just praising him to the moon. And we're talking about how presidential he was because he attacked Syria.
He killed one or two people.
That was when the media really started to take a liking to him.
Yeah.
And then the narrative from April to May, I recall, was that Bannon was out and Kushner was in, and it was clear that was the narrative was true because a couple of things happened, right? Remember the State of the Union address? The joint address to Congress?
Back in the middle of February?
It was back in the middle of February or early March 1.
No, I looked at it. It was in the middle of February.
It was in the middle of February. Okay. Well, at the time, in the middle of February, Trump had, at the very top of the State of the Union address, he condemned anti-Semitism for all these crank calls to Jewish centers.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be a crank. It was a Jew actually in Israel who was behind it, right?
Well, there were two hoaxers. One was a black man who was
from the Intercept.
Because of some ex-girlfriend or something like that who he was trying to blame or she was trying to blame him. But most of them were a Jew, a young Jewish man in Israel.
Mm-hmm. So he started to condemn, that was what I would call being the first condemnation of anti-Semitism or something. It was at the top of this, and the significance is that it was at the very top. It was the first item on the State of the Union address, right? And that was a worrisome sign. And then, of course, he gave a speech or something. This was in the United States. I believe it was at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And Trump pledged to fight anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
And then a week later, it was either a week later, it was in early May 1. I forget the timeline here. But he went over to Israel, remember that?
I do.
And he went to the Wailing Wall and wore the little skull cap. And
Melania was with him and had a tender moment.
Had a tender moment. And they were gave the speech where he pretty much pledged allegiance to Netanyahu.
No,
that was a huge.
I think we need to be fair. There was I don't remember if it was AIPAC or another Jewish organization conference or meeting he attended, in which he kind of counter-signaled Jews somewhat.
Really? Maybe I didn't catch that.
I think he was talking about cutting off funding some of the foreign aid to Israel or something like that. He's done a couple of things like that. There's not been any follow-through, but just to be fair, he has counter-signaled a little bit, but not much follow-through on those. But
all right, well, so we get to around the whole narrative until early May was that Cohn was, in the White House, Cohn and Kushner were ascendant, and Bannon was in the doghouse. And then, of course, Trump came out and started attacking Bannon.
Yeah.
Around this time, he was saying
making snide remarks.
This guy just works for me. He made a couple comments this guy just works for me.
Hey, it was my strategy
It was my strategy.
Yeah.
He had nothing to really do with my victory.
Yeah.
It was a couple things like that because it was just rubbed me the wrong way that he was.
Yeah. Well, he did. He did much the same with Jeff Sessions.
Yeah.
After
I know something we skipped.
Himself.
We skipped how he threw Flynn under the bus. He that was early on. That was in January or February.
Oh, yeah, that was very early. I'm not even sure. Did Flynn even take the position, or was he withdrawn before he was?
I think he was confirmed, and then like a week or two later, he was out.
Okay. Well, the reason was just because, just a brief reminder, is that he was not completely forthright in some of his statements to Michael Pence concerning some contacts with Russian citizens or Russian government officials. It seemed kind of, well, I'm getting that confused a little bit with Sessions, where they were talking about Sessions had some contacts, but it was basically like it was his job as a senator to be in contact with counterparts from Russia, and also he attended ambassador parties and balls and that sort of thing, where he would socially meet Russian officials. So it didn't stop Sessions' appointment, but it did stop Flynn's appointment. So. Oh,
okay, all right. Well, anyway, Flynn was given the boot early on, and that was a worrisome sign. And then after Flynn, and of course, it seemed like after Flynn, the next one in the doghouse was Bannon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Trump went after Bannon, and it was in I think it was the New York Post or one of the New York newspapers. And Bannon's the thing that undermined Bannon with Trump more than anything is that Bannon was on the cover of Time magazine as like Trump's mastermind or the real president or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and of course you had there was supposedly leaks from Jared Kushner.
Leaks, yeah.
Concerning Bannon, and if you remember back early in the administration, there was supposedly a lot of leaks coming from the Trump administration, and they weren't able to get all of those the sources on those now down, but it's widely suspected that Kushner has been the source of quite a few of them. And that was what Bannon was floating out there, and it wasn't long after that he was gone. Bannon.
Well, around the narrative was around, or the reporting was around like May, June. Bannon was pretty much under house arrest and was in the doghouse with Trump, and
didn't have full access.
Didn't have full access. And then like it shifted immediately from Bannon to like the end of May. What happened is I know what it was. Kushner advised Trump to fire James Comey, the FBI director.
Yep.
And when Comey was fired, Sessions had recused himself from the case early on, right?
He did. Yeah. And
maybe it was early in the administration.
Yeah.
So like when Comey was fired, Rod Rodenstein, the assistant attorney general, deputy, appointed Mueller, right?
Yep.
And so from the end of May all through the summer, it was Mueller and the Russian narrative, right?
It was. The only time that it wasn't was that brief little period in April when after Trump bombed Syria.
That's right.
They were trying to, maybe there's not much to this Russian narrative after all. But then they came back around to it. So.
Yeah, so I want to say when Trump first went after Sessions was late May, early June.
Yeah, because of his recusal. Because he could have
ended. Because of his recusal.
He could have ended the special investigator pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that was the major thing at the time. It seemed in May, like from what I recall, and by this point, by the time May rolled around, we were already getting back involved in activism, so I wasn't following politics that closely. But the Mueller thing heated up, and Sessions took his turn in the doghouse, and in the Congress was doing health care, right?
Yeah, was that the first time or the second time by that point?
I think it might have been the second time. I'm not sure, but they kept going after the health care bill. There were several failed votes on repealing and replacing Obamacare. No, they did it like 2 or 3 times, right?
They did, and they're still talking about doing it.
They're still talking about like repealing the individual mandate in the tax reform bill. So all the political capital was spent on the tar baby that was Paul Ryan's and the conservatives' attempt to. Oh, I know something we missed. We missed Gorsuch being appointed to the Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a great victory for conservatives, right? But he's like a mainstream conservative guy, just like a John Roberts. For
the most part.
And so, like, Gorsuch was one of the things that Trump did in that period too early on in the spring.
Yeah. Now, did not the Republicans in the Senate have to pull the nuclear option on Gorsuch?
Yeah, they did. But that was, so that's where we are around May, June with Trump. He had succeeded in appointing Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, but that was really about it, right?
Yeah.
But by that point, Gorsuch was in at Supreme Court, but Sessions was in the doghouse, Bannon was in the doghouse, Flynn was gone, and we were doing health care. And I really do think, hold on. Why don't you talk about like health care for a minute?
Okay, well, this is, they were trying to, the Republicans, since it had been passed, had been running on repeal and replace Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act ever since that time. And each time they would bring it up to a vote in Congress during Obama's presidency, it would pass and Obama would veto it. Or at least every Republican would vote for it. And so, but for some reason, when they had a Republican president, they could not get it to repeal and replace vote during, not at least so far during Trump's administration.
So they've been just grandstanding the whole time.
Yeah, they've just been playing politics, playing up to the base, trying to keep the base motivated and get it coming out to vote. So
there was the failed healthcare started to fail over the summer.
Yeah. And
one thing I do recall is that when did what was it, by July? I want to say the big story. I believe it was at the end of July, was that Reince was fired.
Yeah.
Reince was. There was originally supposed to be 3 power centers. It was Kushner, Bannon, and Reince, and everybody was excited that I know what it was. It was that Reince was out and Scaramucci, the mooch, was in, right?
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Reince Priebus was the former GOP chairman. He has these ties to all the establishment Republicans, and it's widely thought that the reason Trump brought him in is because he knows how to move legislation. He has all these connections on Capitol Hill, but it didn't work out that way.
So Reince and Spicer was the press secretary, and he was the one who was replaced by the mooch.
Yeah.
And Reince and Spicer, I think it was before Charlottesville, so it was in July, and they were both kicked out, and the mooch was brought in, and that brings us to like the beginning of August.
Yeah.
And that was right when we were about to do Unite the Right, and then of course we went out there and did that, and that's when all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
What did you think about that? You remember there was 3 or 4 Trump statements, right?
Well, he was asked, I think, even while the event was still going on, or right after we had been dismissed, the press was asking him for comments, for disavowals and this sort of thing, and he made an initial comment to disavow in his first statement, and then his second statement, he had mentioned violence, condemning the violence on both sides, which was the most reasonable, I guess, statement that any public official had made, even acknowledging that there was violence on the part of the left. Of course, we know, because you and I were there, along with all the other people, that it was all the violence was initiated by the left, whether it was Antifa or Black Lives Matter or Surge or whoever it might have been. Yeah, at least Trump acknowledged that the violence was being caused, or was that the left participated in the violence. at Charlottesville. So
yeah, so that's Trump's statement was kind of okay. Well, I condemn both sides. Condemn and disavow. Then it was I disavow both sides. And then he actually made one comment is like they charged at the alt-right. The alt-left charged at the alt-right, right?
And he said that there were good people on both sides.
And he said there were good people on both sides. That wasn't completely... He didn't completely throw us under the bus.
No.
At that point. But a lot of Congress and all the cucks in Congress weren't satisfied with that.
And the media.
And so that's when they started the resolution. And the resolution was passed by both houses of Congress, and it didn't mention Antifa, and he signed it kind of just to get it out of the way.
Yeah, but he made some sort of signing statement that was kind of took away from some of the act of signing it somehow, according to some people. And, of course, you had some Republicans, like you had Ryan, John McCain, I think. Was it Jeff Flake as well? And was Mitch McConnell in there? Who were, just categorically condemning us and saying nothing about Antifa whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I know Ryan was, but I'm not sure about the other folks. Was it, or was Graham one of those people as well?
Who, Lindsey Graham?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he was. Remember him being one of the ones like, oh, it was all their fault. It was.
Yeah.
How can you condemn Antifa? They're the good guys or something like that.
Anti-fascist. How can you
the anti-fascists are the good guys.
Yeah.
The other guys are just Nazis. Is how they put it. But after Charlottesville, the failure of health care is when they decided to move on to the big exciting subject of tax reform. Right.
Yeah.
They started quietly working on tax reform, and of course, it recently passed the House, and it's passed the Senate, a Senate subcommittee, and it's going to go up to a vote, I think, in the Senate next week. I don't know how it will go. I expect it will pass.
Yeah, my understanding that is, well, as these things usually do, it's changed substantially from the original bill that was submitted that more conformed to the Trump's proposal. It's gotten a lot more friendly to the establishment through the legislative process. Yeah.
Well, you should know some more about this than I would.
That's about it. That's about it.
What is that's just it's more friendly to the establishment?
Yeah. Well, the legislative process, that's what happens.
Yeah. I want to say they want to cut the corporate tax rate from 35 to 20.
My understanding that's going to be supposed to be a permanent cut.
Permanent cut, and then there's going to be temporary cuts.
The individual cut to the tax cut to individuals, the middle class, are going to sunset. They're temporary.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So it'll be something. The way I understand it is that there's a permanent corporate tax cut, and there's all these other smaller tax cuts for individuals. But it'll be something that's front loaded, in that you'll see the most benefits from it for first 2 or 3 years, and then it'll phase out, and it'll be just nothing but the big corporate tax cut.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the window dressing of what's at the core of this.
Which was not.
It's telling that that's what they want to spend their agenda doing.
Yeah, which is not what Trump ran on.
No.
He talked about
build the wall.
Well, that, and also as far as he ran as a populist to be friendly to the average working man and try to bring jobs back. I don't know if you want to talk about the job situation as far as if he's had any excess of that or not. And then to penalize some of these corporations, particularly the ones who are moving jobs overseas.
Mm-hmm. Originally in tax reform, I want to say there was supposed to be a border tax, where the idea was that they would cut, the way I understood it, as it was explained during the campaign, is that when they talked about tax reform, which was by far something they didn't dwell on during the campaign, was that the idea was that they were going to cut taxes for corporations in the United States, but what they would do is they'd add this border tax to where corporations just wouldn't pocket the tax cut and continue to export jobs overseas.
Yeah.
They couldn't just ship their factories over to say Vietnam or South Korea or China.
There was going to be a tariff
The tariff, yeah. But they eliminated that, right?
Yeah.
After all the complaining about it. So that's not part of it anymore. Now it went from, that was the big difference I want to say between tax reform as it was explained by Trump during the campaign and Cruz and Rubio, that the other guys who were running didn't want to do the border tax, but now they've got rid of the border tax now that the campaign is over.
Yeah.
TPP was killed in that first month of the nationalist populist revolution.
Well,
so Charlottesville happened. We forgot to say Bannon was out.
Yeah.
Immediately after Charlottesville, Bannon was given. He apparently had resigned even before Charlottesville.
Yeah.
It just hadn't been announced. But
Gorka left a week or so after Bannon left.
Gorka left, and one of the things Trump did over the summer was that he pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which I guess it was not something of any major interest to our movement, but that's another thing conservatives can hang their hat on.
Yeah, despite
that
the actions of Jared and Ivanka.
Ivanka and Jared wanted to stay in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And they lost on that. Then there was also the transgender order where he said transsexuals couldn't be in the military. That's got hung up in court again.
Yeah. Well, and also
along with the
Mattis,
sanctuary cities.
And Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, reversed that somehow.
Really? See, I didn't know that. That's another thing that he kind of did to, keep his base happy. Like, okay, I'll kick trainees out of restrooms, and then even that got squelched. But then, so by the time we get to September, Bannon's gone. Gorka's either gone or was leaving.
Yep.
Flynn is long since gone. The Russia investigation keeps heating up. They started on tax reform, which they're wrapping up now. Healthcare was a bust, and they spent the whole year on this. One of the other things they tried to do is I know the House passed some kind of banking finance reform. I don't think it's got past the Senate yet, though. So the House has, voted to cut taxes. The House has voted to, what else? Cut taxes, to, not to do it. The House voted to get away with Obamacare, and they voted to, I think, repeal Dodd-Frank. And healthcare and banking reform or whatever got tied up in the Senate.
Okay. Well,
now they're on taxes.
There's one big topic that we haven't really mentioned except very briefly, and that is
what's that?
The wall.
The wall, yeah.
So far, the spending proposal he proposed back in spring, a continuing resolution, the wall got it blocked. And he said September, and from my understanding, it was not funded in September either.
That's right.
The only thing that was funded was the prototype walls, which began construction back some time ago, just to figure out which type of wall was the best for the southern border. And of course, we did mention the sanctuary cities being overturned or being tied up in the courts, and also the was it the 6 or 7 country ban that is commonly called the Muslim ban, although it's not really a Muslim ban.
It's the 6 or 7 country ban.
Yeah, well, the first time it was 7 countries, and then the second time it was submitted, it was 6.
And Sudan was taken off that. Remember that?
Yeah.
For before Shelbyville, when Emmanuel Sampson happened, they celebrated that day by taking Sudan off the ban list.
Yeah. Although, that was probably in the works before that happened. But you would think, we have a Sudanese immigrant who committed a mass shooting. Let's not take it off the list. But
one thing we haven't talked about is the defense bill. I want to say they were doing that in September, and that was incredible because it was far bigger than Trump. Trump had asked for, I think, like maybe 500 billion or something. It ended up being like $700 billion.
Yeah.
And this includes like 65 billion for wars in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq. And at 65, now get this, okay, they have no problem giving 65 billion for wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. But 1.6 billion is what I've heard the number thrown around for the border wall, and that's like a huge deal. Like they're like, I can't believe we'll spend that much money on such a waste. And then like in that bill they wanted I think $700 million for. I wrote about this on OD the other day. $700 million for Israel's missile defense, the Iron Dome, and all this other stuff. Then they gave $500 million to Ukraine, and they're trying to arm Ukraine now. Oh, that's another thing we haven't talked about. Congress passed sanctions on Russia. So, and I think they passed it by such large margins that Trump couldn't even have vetoed it. But we got new sanctions on Russia. Trump gave that speech, I think it might have been in September, where he, it was like the Axis of Evil speech, except he added Venezuela to it.
Oh.
He's like, it was like the threats to our time are North Korea and Iran and Venezuela.
Well,
it was at the UN. It was the UN speech he did.
Okay.
So there's been that.
And they voted
the defense bill.
They voted for $220 million to Zimbabwe after
really?
Mugabe's ouster the other day. Yeah.
See, I didn't know that. On the foreign policy front, we forgot in the spring he backed away. He was saying NATO was obsolete, and then he reversed himself and he said that NATO was good and NATO needs to stay.
Yeah.
And
now, as he's still continuing with his campaign pledge as far as having other NATO countries pay more of their expense for
I don't think so. The Eastern Bloc countries do. I mean, the Baltic states, of course, do, because they get by far the most bang out of their buck, but I don't think the other Western European countries do. Still. So like it's been just one thing after another. And now we're getting down to like October. What happened last month? Do you remember? With Trump? Anything new?
Well, I think in October you had the Russia revelations come out, where you had the fusion GPS revelations and this sort of thing. I think that was in October, where some of the heat is being taken off Trump in regards to Russia, and a little more light is being shown on Hillary regarding that, and also the uranium deal that she did.
Oh yeah, he decertified the Iranian deal, right?
Yep.
Iran deal.
No, I'm talking about the uranium, where Russia.
No, uranium. That's something else. Okay, that reminded me of Iran though. So he decertified the Iran deal, and that has like 2 months, I want to say, to get renegotiated or amended in Congress, or we're out of the Iran deal.
Now, one thing we haven't mentioned,
the NFL.
There's that, but what is the status of NAFTA? Is that still to be renegotiated, or what?
I've heard, the trick. Actually, the trick I heard is that one of the things that hasn't been. They're working on it. I think renegotiating it. But what I heard is that the trick is that they were going to kill. They killed TPP. Mm-hmm. But what they want to do is they want to add a lot of the stuff that was in TPP to the renegotiation of NAFTA. So it's like a backdoor TPP.
Oh.
But no, there's been really no movement on that. I mean, at least it hasn't been done yet. I'll just say that we still have basically the same trade policy that we had a year ago. In terms of another thing we haven't really talked about is ICE arrest. Mm-hmm. And you would think that there was going to be this huge roundup of illegal aliens who'd be deported, and there was a crackdown on MS-13, right?
There was.
There has been, or
it's been. Justice Department.
That's been in the news.
Yeah.
But overall, what's happened with ICE arrest is that ICE arrest illegal aliens is about where it was before Obama took over with George W. Bush. So we're kind of like, even in terms of arrests and deportations, we're going back to the norm, the Republican norm.
Well, and of course they've reset the refugee cap at what, 49,000?
50. I think it was at 49 or 50,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is where it was, I think, too, when Bush was president.
Yeah. Before
Obama lifted it. So it's not been like dramatic change there either.
No. And of course, the DACA, he's been playing.
DACA, the big thing, the big enchilada.
He's been playing with politics with DACA as far as, well, we're going to push it off to December, and Congress had, at that time, that would give Congress 6 months. So this would have been back in June, I suppose, when this first came up, for Congress to do something by December. And so far they haven't done anything. Now, whether he's going to repeal, I think as a matter of Congress had until December to basically give amnesty or find a.
I think it's March, if I'm not mistaken.
But then
they want to do it in December. The Democrats want to do it in December. Trump has talked about doing it in December, but I think the real deadline is March.
Okay.
On that.
All right.
But so Sessions after Charlottesville, or when Sessions got his huge dressing down by Trump and was just humiliated, absolutely humiliated in the media, he stayed on because he was going to, he wanted to, he took all the criticism from Trump, and he decided to stay on to implement, his agenda in the Justice Department. And the big crowning achievement of that, I think, was it in September? I think it was announced that that DACA, DACA was over or something.
Yeah.
And they had to, and then everybody was clapping, and it's okay, great, this is a huge white pill, because we had been wondering, why hasn't, Trump said he was going to get rid of the DACA. Why hasn't he done so? Because, he had surrounded himself with the angel moms and all that during the campaign, and we heard about Jamil, and Jamil Shaw Jr., the black guy, the dad, was just trotted out all during the campaign, and then a week after, what happened was a week or two after they announced that DACA was over, Trump announced that he was going to do a deal with Nancy Pelosi, but then he got all the criticism and kind of backed off of it.
Yeah.
So
well,
now
he was saying that any deal was going to have to include a wall and border funding and all this sort of thing, something that they would never agree to. So, I mean, that's what he was saying at that time. So it included a poison pill in there, so something that the Democrats would never vote for. So he's basically saying that there wasn't going to be a deal. But, yeah, so I wouldn't say...
It's going to be a deal.
I wouldn't say that he was actually serious about that. Not with the Democrats, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, so anyway, the status of DACA is that, from what I understand, is that they're supposed to be coming up with some kind of arrangement where they end chain migration and have border security in exchange for the DACA amnesty.
E-Verify.
And that's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be done either in December at the earliest or by March.
Okay.
Because they want to put it into this, the budget in December? The Democrats want to, and have a clean DACA bill. A clean DREAM Act. And if they don't get that, they're threatened to shut down the government.
Huh.
And so anyway, and the wall funding, the wall funding, I think they passed $1.6 billion, and it passed the House, and it's then gone to the Senate, and it's in limbo. So the wall funding in the Senate is kind of up in the air, but the interesting thing about it is that it's funding for 72 miles of border fence, right? So the best case scenario is that they get the funding for the border wall, and they build all 72 miles of it, right? And they've completed a section of the wall before the 2018 midterms. Now, mind you that they've already built a large, even in the past, they've built
Mm-hmm.
portions of it in the past, right? Like when Bush was president, I think they built like 400 or 500 miles of it. Right?
Yeah, I think
it didn't go across the whole border, which is like, what was it, 1,000, 2,000 miles or something?
Yeah. Well,
so they have to go. They want to like complete like this 72-mile section of it, and that's what all the suspense is about. So even if they did build the 72 miles of it, right, illegal aliens would just go around that, like they have with the other hundreds of miles they've already got.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of recent appointments I'd like to go over, and then we'll finish up.
Okay.
One was the new nominee for the Homeland Security, that woman who was very pro-immigration. And then the other is the chair, not the chair, but no, I guess it is the chairman for the Federal Reserve, who was who was
a Gentile,
despite decades of precedent, as a Gentile. The last one being Volcker back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard this woman they're trying to put her in charge of DHS is like really terrible.
Yeah.
Is that the case? I haven't paid much.
That's what I've heard, that she's pretty much pro-immigration.
Pro-immigration, pro-amnesty, and well, it wasn't like was it some border guards that were killed the other day or beaten up, or did you hear about that?
Oh yeah,
like on the border.
One had his I think it was a border guard had his head crushed in with a rock. I think he got rocked.
Yeah, something like that. So anyway, we're about a year in, and like the cabinets continue to evolve because Bannon's gone. A year in, Bannon's gone. Flynn is gone. Flynn might even actually be turning on turning on Trump in the Russia probe. We don't know. There's rumors that Kushner and Ivanka might be headed out soon, although that we don't know anything about that. The stock market has done great over the last year.
Yep. I don't have any stocks. Do you have any stocks?
yeah, I don't have any either. So I guess if you're a large stock, if you have a huge stock portfolio, your America is great again.
Yeah.
But
making Wall Street
basically the same trade policy. Over the summer, another thing that happened is that Trump escalated the war in Afghanistan. So we're sending more troops over there, or have been for the last about 6 months now.
Yeah. Well, to counter that, he has kind of more aligned himself with Russia and Syria and helping remove ISIS, and ISIS is pretty much gone now. And pretty much all of the Middle East, they hold very
Putin was having a big conference that Putin basically won. Putin and Iran basically won in Syria.
Yeah.
And that's over now.
The U.S. just stopped helping ISIS and the other anti-Assad forces, pretty much.
Yeah, so Assad won. Assad's going to stay. ISIS is pretty much devastated, but that's because mostly the Iraqi army, Iran, and Russia. And now the question is, the U.S. backed the Kurds in that war. But now the question is, what happens to the Kurds now that ISIS is defeated?
Yeah.
And that's a huge point of contention because it's been pissed off the Turks. Because that's the main thing they worry about, that Kurdish minority.
Yeah.
They don't want another Kurdistan, and that's kind of turned Turkey against NATO and against us.
Yeah.
So that's about where we're at. We in terms of our foreign policy, we have like basically the same foreign policy, although we're kind of weaker, I would say. Like Russia's made some big moves on the world stage and has increased its profile by winning in Syria. But we have the same alliances and stuff. Trump's been over, I want to say, South Korea and all that. We have the same trade policy we did a year ago. Immigration has changed a little. Deportations are up to about where they were in the Bush era.
Well, and crossings has decreased, or at least it's fluctuated. Sometimes it's down and sometimes it's up. I don't know if overall it's up or down compared to Obama or to Bush.
You look at what's happened I mean, you look at the tie this back. You go back to a year ago, and we thought we were going to have this nationalist populist revolution,
Yep.
and the whole year has been spent on basically the wish list of conservative policy items, whether it's Gorsuch on the Supreme Court and more conservative court appointments, healthcare reform, tax reform. You know, they want to do welfare reform next. That's number 3.
Oh.
So it's straight out of the 1990s, the agenda.
Well, I mean, if they eliminate or put some severe penalties or prohibitions as far as immigrants receiving public assistance, I'd be all for that. That would
we'll see. I doubt it. I think they just want to, juice up the workforce, get more people back in the workforce off the welfare rolls in order to flood the labor market.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
So
what was I going to say?
Well, I think
it's been like this whole conservative policy agenda, but like in terms of like nationalism and populism, like the big thing I can think of is the NFL. Trump's tweets about the media and the NFL. It's been this token gesture kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because, as we've always said, that the system can't be reformed, particularly from the inside. And I think Trump has pretty much demonstrated that. I mean, if Trump couldn't reform it, being an outsider, not part of the established political system, not really being beholden to any of the large donors or the big media or to a lot of the establishment politicians, then who could?
I mean, this is the perfect reform the system scenario that Americal, this billionaire, runs, and he runs this radical campaign and blows all the conservative candidates out of the water. Crushes the Republican establishment, wins the election, defeats the Democrats, comes into office with all this huge mandate, and this feeling that there's been this world historical change. It was in the works,
and then
when he wins, the moment he wins, he starts to walk everything back, and goes back to the same people, the same policies, the same ideas that everybody was fed up with. Is how it seems to me.
He promised to drain the swamp, and he's been swimming.
Drain the swamp.
He's out there swimming in there amongst the alligators and all.
Yeah, and Bannon, meanwhile, and one point that was made in an article that was written today is that Bannon's trajectory kind of mirrored our own in that, they won the election. He came in really strong in that first month, and then from that first month on, from about March on, he was kind of downgraded in power, and then just completely pushed out, and that was it. He's back on the outside.
Yeah.
And that's how it feels with us, although it feels like it might have been a little earlier. But even the mainstream nationalist, populist, civic nationalist MAGA types, they were, even like Gorka, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were purged too.
Oh, yeah.
So, what do we do now? What's going to happen in this year ahead after everything just hit a brick wall, and their big idea for next year is welfare reform? Like, it's just more of the same conservative stuff. I mean, it's like they were supposed to do this populist agenda for the working class, and it's just been it's been reduced to tweets about the NFL.
Yeah, well, we got to appeal to those disillusioned Trump voters who've not received immigration reform and build a wall, deport them all, who haven't received the NAFTA repeal and the trying to restructure the economy to benefit the working man.
My sense of a lot of these people is that they're just holding on to the faith. They're keeping the faith that they're just, gritting the teeth and they're like, okay, well, we still have 3 more years. And that's their attitude, that, that it's really Congress's fault. It's the establishment's fault. And we just need to purge a few of the cucks and then everything will change. But it hasn't been just Congress. It's also been the administration too.
Oh, yeah.
As we've talked about in the podcast. So yeah, we can keep trying to appeal to them. A lot of them are just really tribal. They do not like to hear criticism of Trump, period.
Yeah.
Because if you criticize their leader, you're helping the Democrats. is the way they see it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, will see the light and realize that we've been sold kind of a bill of goods here, and it hasn't, wasn't what it was advertised to be.
Yeah. Well, it could have even been sold in good faith by Trump, but he just in over his head, and he tried, but the system overcome his attempt. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to attribute a bad faith to him. I think he was sincere in most of what he pledged to try to do. He may have pledged more than he was able. Well, we know he pledged more than he was able to deliver. Whether that was intentional or just he overestimated his ability, one or the other.
I do not believe some people want to say that it was, everything was set on course until a few Roman salutes at the MPI conference, but
yeah, that's got nothing to do with it.
I don't think it was ever really. Yeah, I don't even think that even really mattered to their thinking at all. I think this was always, what they had set out to do. This was, I mean, they were never. Do they really mean all this stuff? They ran on. It doesn't seem like it. I mean, the decisions that were made were like, okay, there's no way this is just completely thrown off by a few Roman salutes at
no.
obscure conference of like 300 people.
No.
This was, had a lot more, all the power that, the family had, whether it was Kushner and Ivanka. I think, a big factor of it was that Trump wanted to surround himself with winners, and the winners happened to be all these establishment people, and all those establishment people gave him advice you don't need to do this, you need to do it this way, and that's how it turned out on all these major fronts. He was talked out of. He might have had his instinct might have been to do one thing anyway, but he might have liked the serious thing, or backing Luther Strange in the primary in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
That's another clear because his gut was to go with more, but he got talked out of it.
Yeah.
By Corker and McConnell, and they convinced him to do it.
Yeah.
So, anything else to add?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up the whole, the year of huge expectations at the beginning to the point where now we're like, we'll be thankful if we get that 72 miles of border wall before 2018.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I'm glad that we didn't have a major war. That's good.
Yeah. Well, let folks know where to reach you on your website and Twitter and Gab.
It's at OccidentalDissent.com and at OCC Dissent on Twitter and Gab. Mm-hmm. I hope we're not banned from Twitter this month, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, in December. Yeah. And as far as myself, both at Twitter and Gab, I'm Harold Cruz on both on Twitter and Gab. So yeah, this has been episode number 60 of the Southern Nationalist Radio, and I want to wish everyone good night.